So a very good evening to Cheshire District Amateur Radio Society. Brian, can I ask you to say a couple of words, as you were the person who originally invited Mike to come along to the club and talk to us?
That's dropping you in it, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm an avid reader of Practical Wireless, and Mike's got a monthly column in there. I'm also a Raspberry Pi geek, so that goes down well as well. And I noted in, I think it was the last edition of Practical Wireless, that Mike was doing a talk, and I think it's a good thing that as amateurs we can all get together and sort of just pass our knowledge on to other people that want it. So I contacted Mike, and that was it, and he's very kindly offered to talk to us.
Okay, this will be about 40 minutes or so, it usually takes. And then we can have questions and go wherever that leads us. Let me just position this. I've called it a pictorial introduction to data modes because I've used a lot of pictures. Because I found in my days of working with data modes that a lot of people who are new to data modes get very confused as to how the basics operate, how things all connect together, and what data modes is. It's a bit of a big jump if you've never touched it before. So the idea of this talk is to provide an introduction to data modes, covering some of the fundamentals about how things happen in data modes, and introducing you to the popular modes. The one that's king at the moment, of course, is FT8 and FT4. So I cover those, but it is only an introductory talk. So this is what I'm covering tonight. So what are the data modes? How do they work? Once you've got that, it's about what do you need? Which mode do you choose? A bit about using FT8, and then I'll summarize. So let's get back to why would you want to bother with data modes? Well, amateur radio is supposed to be about self-education, and learning new ways of communication is part of that process. And we're very fortunate in that there are a huge range of ways that we can communicate with each other. And data modes forms an important part of that variety. Data modes are also very good for QRP operators because they're very much more efficient and more sensitive than trying to operate SSB. And they're good for DX as well. And there are data modes that make a very good propagation tool. You've probably all heard of and used Whisper at various times, but that's a fantastic propagation tool to test how your antennas go in or to spot paths that are opening up. And the other great thing about data modes that I found is that you can always find activity. There's a day gone by where I haven't been able to find a data mode running quite successfully. And the other thing, of course, it's basically free because all this you've got the kit you need. In most cases, you've got a computer, you've got a rig, and the software that you need to run the data modes is actually free. So you can do it very cheaply. So what are data modes? Well, they're basically a text-based communication system in most cases. Most of them use a very narrow bandwidth, often very much narrower than an SSB signal. So things like FT8, for example, operates in 50 Hertz bandwidth. So they're very narrow bandwidth. And one of the things that confuses people that are new to data modes is if you get to a program like WSJTX or FLDigi, you will see there's so many different modes. And that immediately confuses people. Say, well, which one should I choose? And why on earth are there so many modes? And the reason is because they've been constantly evolving. There's always a new one in development. And as people move from one to the other, the old modes are not taken out of the software, they stay there. So that's why you'll find if you open up FLDigi and go to mode, there's a huge list of different modes. Don't let that confuse you because there's only a handful in current use. So the next concept that we need to understand with data modes is serial data. So what is serial data? Although you might not think it, you're all familiar with serial data because this is serial data. Morse code is serial data. So you might want to send a word in Morse code, but you send it one element at a time. And that's what we do in data modes. Whatever we're sending, we'll break it down and send it one element at a time. So if we're doing that on a keyboard, how does that happen? So I'll do this in a little bit. So if we press the letter A on the keyboard, for example, that's converted to, in decimal, a number 65, because computers only work in numbers. But of course, computers don't work in decimal numbers, they work in binary numbers. So the letter A becomes that sequence of characters. So it's a 1, a series of zeros, a 1 and a 0. And then we send that as serial data. So it goes out like so. So the least significant number first, and there we go. That is a series of on-off signals, which represents our data. So that there is how we send the letter A in a very simple and basic data system. So you can see it's quite a logical route through from pressing a key to ending up with a stream of data that we can then move on to the next stage. So all we need to communicate is 2 states. So in binary, it's a 1 and an 0. Now, how do we send that over a radio? Now, we could just turn the carrier on and off like we do with CW. But the problem is we need to be able to decode this with a machine, with a computer. And computers are very poor at sorting out signal, noise. It needs to be more positive than that. So we actually need 2 positive states to switch between for reliable machine decoding. So what we do in the simplest of systems is we just use 2 carrier frequencies. So we just switch between 2 carrier frequencies, where one carrier frequency means a 1, the other character frequency means a 0. And that's called simply frequency shift keying. And you'll find frequency shift keying is the basis of a huge number of data modes out there. Even some of the very complicated ones, still at the fundamental part of them, have frequency shift keying as the modulation technique that's used. And so that was originally used for radio teletype signals. And of course, radio teletype signals are still with us today. They're not very heavily used. They're mainly used in contests, but they're still here. So the difference between the 2 carrier frequencies in data modes is called the shift. So here's an example. So if we were moving between 14 megs for a 0 and 14.001 for a 1, that will be a 1 kilohertz shift. So when you look at a RTTY signal, for example, and you're setting up your decoder, you'll need to know what shift is being used. And commonly for amateur radio, it's 170 hertz shift. So it's quite a narrow shift for doing data modes on RTTY. So originally, when this was introduced, of course, we needed a special transmitter that we could switch the frequencies. So we needed to do a very narrow shift of frequency. So we needed a special transmitter for that. But now, as we've all got SSB transmitters, we can simulate proper frequency shift keying by using audio tones. So let me show you how that works. This might be teaching grandmother to suck eggs, but it's often well to spell these things out. So here we've got a signal generator in the bottom left, got an SSB rig up there, and we've got a frequency counter which is connected to the output of the SSB rig. So the first stage is to generate a 1 kilohertz sine wave and poke it in the microphone socket. So with the rig set to USB, what should come out? What should come out is 14.001. Okay, so it's raised the carrier frequency from the dial frequency up by 1 kilohertz. So what happens if we put a 2 kilohertz tone in? So out of the rig comes 14.002. So we've raised it by 2 kilohertz. So that means that if we change the frequency of an audio signal going in the microphone socket, we can simulate a frequency shift keyed signal at RF. So with our 1 kilohertz shift that we were doing before, if we shift between 1 kilohertz and 2 kilohertz on our audio tone, the carrier shifts by 1 kilohertz as well. So that's the transmit side. So how does that work on the receive side of things? Remember, for this to work properly, you always have to use USB. If you use LSB, it's upside down. So let's look at it the other way around. So let's inject a carrier frequency of 14.001 megahertz into the aerial socket of our receiver. And what comes out? 1 kilohertz. You can see the story coming again. Put 2 kilohertz, 14.002, and 2 kilohertz come out. So what I've just explained to you, perhaps in an overly simplified way, is that by using an SSB rig, we can simulate frequency shift keying simply with audio tones. And we can actually generate all sorts of complicated frequency shift and phase shift signals at audio level and translate them up to RF and bring them back down again. So that's the basis of modern data systems. And it's why with just one computer program, you can actually generate a huge range of data modes. So getting into a little bit more about how they work, the introduction of computer sound cards many years ago now was revolutionary. Sound Blaster was the first one in the 1990s. And that opened the door for doing data modes via a computer. So before we had sound cards, we could generate the audio tones and do frequency shift keying and decode it with filters and all sorts. But as soon as we had the Sound Blaster card, it meant that we could do data modes via the computer. And that immediately spawned the developments of lots of new data mode systems with phase shift keying and frequency shift keying. So that was the revolution in data modes, which made it a lot cheaper to do because before we had the computer sound cards, we were using quite complicated terminal units that would resolve the RTTY signals. And we didn't need any of that once computers came to play. So what do you need? Let's just have a quick sip. So what do you need in order to do data modes, assuming you've got a computer and you've got your SSB rig? It depends on your rig. There's basically two classes of rig to consider for this, and there's two different solutions. The first are rigs that don't have a USB socket, okay? So, which is things like the popular FT897 and etc. That era of rigs didn't have any USB connectors on them to handle in the audio and the cat control. So that's the first one. And the second category is all the later rigs that have got a USB socket that handles the audio and the cat control. So let's see how you do it if you've got an older rig. So the things you need to make in terms of connections between the two is you need an audio out feed from your rig going to the PC. Now, most rigs have an audio out available on the rear panel, and it might be an accessory socket or a data out socket. It varies between rig to rig, but the important thing about using the output on the rear of the rig is that it's constant level, so it's not affected by the volume control. I know some people have done it by taking a feed from the headphone socket or the speaker output, but that's a real pain because every time you turn the volume on the rig, it changes the level of the signal going into the computer. So always use the accessory or data out socket on the back of the rig for that audio. Going the other way, we need an audio feed from the computer going into the rig. Again, it's better if you can use the socket on the back. That's the easiest way to get in there, and you can generally do these two connections on the same socket. And you'll find many people sell cables to do exactly this. You can put the signal in the microphone input, but you just need to watch the signal levels if you do that. So those are both audio feeds, so you just need a screen cable for each of those. The other thing you might like to have, but is not essential, is a PTT line or a serial line for handling computer control. It's not essential for data modes, because most data modes you can operate quite happily with Vox switching for transmit receive switching. So if you want to do it really simply, you just need the two audio leads, and that works fine. One thing you can do as a convenience that can help is to put a couple of simple level controls, a 10K pot or something similar in each lead. So you've got a manual adjustment of the level, so you can adjust the drive to your rig and also the level going to the computer. It's often more important for the drive level on the rig because they often require different audio drive levels on different bands to give the same power. So that's what you need if you've got an older rig that doesn't have a USB port. So it can be as simple as the top two lines on there, just an audio in and an audio out, and you can get onto data modes. So the other alternative for the older rigs, if you want to buy a bought solution, is to get something like a signal link interface. There are lots of these interfaces out there. These usually have a USB connection to the PC and then dedicated leads that go from the signal link unit or any other unit that plug in the back of the rig and pick up the audio feeds, and sometimes PTT. There are models out there that handle the CAT control as well, but that's a way, if you don't want to make your own leads and you prefer a bought solution, then that's the way you can do it with the older rigs. So the interface provides those sound level controls that you can see on there. And this signal link has a Vox control on it as well, and you can add some delay in the transmit receive switching. And some of them have got some CAT control built into them. So that's for the older rigs. So if you're coming onto a newer rig, most of today's current range of rigs will have a USB connector at the back, and the USB connector will provide access to the CAT control and also the audio ins and outs. And so all you need to do is to put a USB cable between your PC and your rig, and you're in business. So that's clearly the easiest way to get going. But let's just have a look and see what happens inside the rig so you understand what's going on. So this is what's going on inside the rig. So the audio input and output signals in your rig will go to a sound card, which is actually mounted inside your rig. And that sound card will connect to a USB hub also inside your rig. And then the rig controls will go to a serial adapter, which will then join to the USB hub all within the rig. And so you get a single USB cable to go between the rig and the PC. So that's how everything connects up. And obviously the later rigs are by far the easiest way to do this. So what software do you need? Well, you just need two free programs. There are lots of them out there, of course. There aren't just two programs, but the two I recommend for those start-ins are probably the most popular two programs is FLDigi, which covers the wide range of data modes other than the WS-JTX weak signal modes. So it does all your RTTY PSK31, all those standards and lots of other ones as well. And that's available for Windows, Mac, Linux, and the Raspberry Pi. And it's well proven, and it's still updated regularly. So it's not old software that's just laying there fallow. It's actually in constant development, so it's well up to date. And you get rig control for all the latest rigs as well. And the other one, of course, you need is WSJTX, which includes the full range of all the latest weak signal data modes types. Very competent program, which is available again for Windows, Mac, Linux, and the Raspberry Pi. In fact, I sell a data modes card on my website, which is very popular. I've sold loads of these, which has all the basic data modes programs already installed, ready to go. You just plug it in and use it. Now, one of the things that people sometimes get overcautious about is clock accuracy. So for a lot of the weak signal modes rely on using time slots for their transmission. And that means that everyone needs to be working with an accurate clock. But you don't really need much better than 1 second accuracy. So you can get a GPS based system, etc., but you don't really need to go to that extreme just to run the weak signal modes. So an internet connection will give you sufficient accuracy. But the Windows default time update is weekly, which is not good enough. But there are a load of free software programs you can use to increase the PC's accuracy. Basically, what they do is they go off more frequently and update your clock. So these are a few of the more popular programs that you can get to sync up your time on your PC. So what are the most popular modes? Well, FT8 dominates, and FT4 is probably the next most common. You've then got Whisper, which is the beacon mode, JS8 Core, which is an adaptation of FT8, but is able to handle free text messaging. PSK31 was the forerunner of FT8, i.e. it was the #1 data mode a few years ago, but it's now faded significantly. And JT65 and JT9 are all lower down the list. RTTY, you'll generally only find being used for contests. It's still used a lot for contests. And Packet is mainly APRS stuff. So FT8 and FT4 dominate all the HF modes, and it really dominates all the HF data modes. And it's a system that uses what are known as structured messages, which means you can't have a normal QSO, you can't have a conversation with FT8 or FT4, but you can make a minimum information contact. And it does that very successfully. That's what it was designed to do. Virtually all the WSJTX modes are all about establishing a minimum contact under really difficult conditions. So FT8 uses 15 seconds time slots. So you'll transmit for 15 seconds, listen for 15 seconds, transmit for 15 seconds, listen for 15 seconds. FT4 is a faster version of it, which goes for 7.5 seconds. Now, all the FT8 signals operate in a single SSB voice channel. So a 3 kilohertz wide channel on each band. And the beauty of that, and this happens with a lot of data modes, is you don't need to tune around to find data modes because they're all in the same place. So you just tune into, say, 14.074, and that's the channel where you'll find all the FT8 stuff. And I'll show you in a minute how it works. So just out of interest, and I've done this before, I went on PSK Reporter this evening and looked at a report of the last 2 hours of global QSOs at 6 p.m. today. Because most of the data modes software reports the contacts through to PSK Reporter. So you get a good record of what's going on. So in that 2 hours from 4 to 6 o'clock today, there were 2.2 million QSOs. of which 97.25% were FT8, 1.8% were FT4, 0.4 whisper. Now the CW figure is erroneous, I think, because that doesn't cover all CW signals, because where CW is hand sent, no one's reporting that to PSK reporter. It's only people who do CW via computer both ways. So as you can see, FT8 has achieved world domination quite successfully, which is a bit of a shame in my view, because although it's an excellent mode, it's technically very competent, extremely well designed for what it was made for, it means no one's talking to each other because you can't communicate over it. All you can do is register a contact. So one of the great things about FT8 and some of the other data modes is when you tune into 14.074, the decoder will decode all the signals in that band. So you can see everyone that's active and what's going on. The signals are very narrow bandwidth. Each individual one is 50 Hertz for FT8 and 83 Hertz for FT4. The sensitivity is excellent. They operate, the way that sensitivity is specified is a bit confusing to people, because you will see signals rated as being 20 dB below the noise. Well, they're 20 dB below the noise in a 3 kHz speech channel. They're not 20 dBs below the noise in their own channel, otherwise they wouldn't be able to decode them. So this is a little video of FT8 running, and when you look at it, you'll see down at the bottom right here, if you've not seen this before, there's a little bar going across, and what that's doing is that's telling you the time slot. So it's ticking along second by second, the time slot, and as it gets towards the right of that, you will see a whole load of new call signs appear here. This here, the band activity window, shows all the stations and all the contacts that are in progress at the moment. The one on the right shows all the stations that are on your current receive frequency. So if I just start this video going, you'll just see it ticking along the bottom there. About now, it'll start doing its decode, and you'll see stations start chuntering down. There it is, going across again, stepping across. When it gets about 3/4 of the way across, you'll see the decode lag indicator come on, and it will show all the stations coming up. So that's what it looks like when it's operating. So and most of it is automated, which I'll show you in a moment. So if we just look at PSK31, this is probably the most effective chat mode. So if you actually want to talk to someone, have a keyboard chat with someone, PSK31 is probably the best system out there to go for. It's very well proven. It was very well designed. It was designed by Peter Martinez, G4WNC. He's the guy who brought us Amtor and other things. It's an extremely effective mode. It was designed specifically as an HF chat mode, and he did a really good job on it. It's very well thought through. Again, you get all the band activity in a single SSB channel, and most decoders give you simultaneous decoding of all the stations that are running, so you can easily see what's going on. JT65 and JT9 are basically predecessors of FT8. They use structured messages, much the same as FT8, so you're doing minimal contact, no QSO really. And they're very sensitive and ideal for extremely weak signals. Now, Whisper, I'm sure many of you have heard of Whisper, Weak Signal Propagation Reporter. This is a brilliant tool, and it's a great way for you to find out how you're getting out from your station. I've used it many times when I've been playing with antennas to see how I'm doing. And it also gives you a good idea as to what propagation paths might be open at the moment. It's very narrow bandwidth, so it uses just a 6 Hertz bandwidth, but each transmission period is 2 minutes long. Okay, so it runs well on old computers, and you can actually create a self-contained beacon with a Raspberry Pi Zero for £4 and a little low pass filter on the output of it. And you can use that as a whisper beacon. Most people upload their reports to WhisperNet, and then you can view the results on a map or in a database. So this is one of mine. This was from a little while ago. This is an old screenshot. But as you can see, you get a wonderful view. I think I put a transmission out for about 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and went back to look on the map, and you get immediate feedback as to how well you're doing. And it's a tremendous tool. For some reason, where I am, I always do extremely well down to South America, and this shows it up. And you can also have the results as a table. And if you have the table, you get lots of information here. So what I've done here, I've asked it to provide me the last 50 spots of my call sign. And what it's shown me is all the stations that have received me. It's shown the distance to those stations, and it shows what the signal to noise ratio was at that station. So not only can you see who received all your signal, but you can see how strong your signal was in those places. So it's such a useful tool, and it's so easy to use that it's well worth keeping an eye on to see how you're getting out, how things are working. So I'll just quickly cover RTTY. RTTY is the oldest of the data modes, and it's a simple free text mode. You just type on your keyboard and it gets sent over the air, much like that original example I showed you with pressing the keypad. It's mainly used these days for contests. There's a few diehards that use it for QSOs, but it's mainly used for contests. And the reason it's used for contests is because it will synchronize up on a single letter. So you can do very, very short abbreviated QSOs, and they will get through. Most operators that use RTTY will use macros, and all a macro is it's a memory store, basically. So things that you would commonly say in a QSO, you just store to a little message computer memory that you can recall with a single button press. And that just makes life easier, particularly if you're not a particularly good typist, which applies to a lot of people, I think. Then the macros help keep the flow of the QSO going without you stuttering on the keyboard. Packet and APRS is similar in a lot of ways to internet protocol, when the message gets broken into addressed little packets that get to the other end and then get reassembled. You'll mainly see APRS on VHF, UHF, and that's the most common usage of the packet radio system in this country. In the States, it's used for a lot more. So let's just look at a little bit more detail of FT8, because if you're going to start somewhere, you'll probably start with FT8. And the first rule I would say with FT8, as with all data modes, is before you start trying to operate, spend some time on the band monitoring, seeing what goes on, follow a few QSOs back and forth and see what happens, and you'll soon learn. So what I've just done here, I've just set out the way a standard FT8 QSO would go. So if we start off with this guy, Echo Alpha 3 IGB, is sending out a CQ. Now this is a set message for a CQ call. So it will be CQ followed by your call sign, followed by the first 4 digits of your locator. So that's what we'll see come up. Now, if I want to go back to him, I'll double click on his call sign in WSJTX, and I'll send his call and my call along with my locator. That's all I send. And if he picks me up, he'll reply G4WNC EA3, and he'll give me my signal report, which is neg 19. If I've received him okay, we'll do the call sign exchange. Then I'll send R to indicate that I've received my signal strength reading, and plus 01 is his signal strength with me. So he was a strong station. If he gets that okay, he'll basically reply RR and 73. So RR is saying he's got everything. We've both got everything at that point, and I'll go back to him and say 73. Now, I've noticed in recent times, the final message often doesn't happen, and it skips on from there. So that's the basic exchange for an FD8 QSO. So you can see all we're basically exchanging is the locator, the call sign, and a signal report. Okay, and that's what happens with an FD8 call. The only thing you can change is the final part of this last message to personalize that. So here's some things that you need to do if you're operating FTA. Important first thing is to get the transmit drive right. So I suggest you start with a dummy load connected. Set your rig for low power. 5 watts is often enough. Bearing in mind this is supposed to be a weak signal mode. I very rarely, well, at the moment, I don't go above 5 watts at all because that's the maximum output of the little SDR that I'm using, but it's usually enough. And you use the tune button on the software, which I'll show you in just a minute, to put the rig into transmit. And then you can adjust your transmit drive with the TX control. Here's a look at it. So you need to tick this one, this hold TX frequency. That's useful to have there. There's the tune button. Okay. And over here on the right is where you adjust the transmit drive. So there, what you're actually doing at that point is turning the audio signal coming out of your computer and going to your rig. You're turning the audio signal up and down. And so that's changing the drive to the transmitter. And it's as simple as that, just to get that drive right. What you really have to be careful of is overdriving the transmitter, particularly putting too much audio in. So let's move on. Now, one of the things we do commonly on FTA is use split frequency operation. And it's really simple. It increases your chance of success. And when, as you'll see in a moment, when you open WSJTX, there are 2 main panels. There's the one you've already seen where the QSO is running, but there's another one which is called a wide graph. And it's just a spectrum display. Now, as far as receiving, FT8 software will automatically find anyone who is calling your call. It doesn't matter where they're tuned in the band. It will find it, flag it up to you. So here's how you use the wide graph. So this is it. All looks a bit confusing to start off with, but what you've got at the top is a waterfall display, and each one of these red or yellow bands coming down here is a single FT8 station. Okay, so you can see it's quite busy. There's a lot of stations there. At the bottom here is a spectrum display where you can see the spectrum of each of those stations all lined up. The red indicator at the top here, this little red square bracket, is your transmit frequency. And the green one over here is where you're receiving. So the trick with split frequency operation is to press shift click over a vacant spot to lock your transmit frequency on there, because you want to transmit in an empty space. So what you do is you just shift click there, and that will put your transmit frequency there. And where on the previous page I said hold transmit frequency, this will stay there now. That's your transmit frequency. When you set the receive frequency, you don't do it from here. You do it from the main thing when you choose the station you want to talk to. At the bottom here, if you're not getting a clear display, these two controls control the clarity of that waterfall display, and these two at the bottom control the spectrum display. Excuse me. So that's how you set up the wide graph. I'm just going to mute while I cough. So let's now look at an example QSO. This is a recording of a QSO I had, and I'll pause it at the various points. So I've now, whoops, cursor gone. I've got hold transmit frequency selected, and the message I've selected down here, this is where all the messages are, is a CQ call. So I've decided to call CQ. The next thing I'll do is enable TX, because you have to turn that on so you can transmit. And then in this panel up here in yellow, you'll see my CQ call go out. There it is. So we've got silence for a moment while the CQ call is going out. Now we're into receive again. And at the end of the receive cycle, we'll see if anyone's called us. There we go. So in this, which is my receive frequency, you'll see I've got 3 people have called me. PA0, LDE, DG2EM, DL6, MHC. And as you can see, they've all sent their locator. They've all called me. Now, one thing that's really worth having set up is this call first down here. Because when you've had 3 calls come up like this, you've got to decide which one to go back to. If you have call first set, it will automatically pick up the first call back and start responding to that. So if I leave this now, let it run, you will see it's picked up PA0 LDE as the first call. It's populated all these messages down here automatically with all the things it's going to send. So I haven't had to do anything. All the rest of the process is completely automatic now. So my signal is going out, my reply to him. And then here's the incoming signal coming back. There we go. So what we've got here is there's my signal report coming to me. And you'll see that this station is still calling me. That's not a problem. So we've got that. You'll see we've gone down this message list here. So now we can go on to see what happens next. So I'm sending my final to PA0 LDE now. Now, one thing to note here is to stop fully automated QSOs going on. WSJTX will turn off enable transmit once you've finished a QSO. So in order to carry on and work the other stations, you need to enable that again. So I will go and enable TX again so I can send. And you will see that what it does, it picks up the next station automatically. So if you look on the bottom right here, you see it's automatically picked up DL6 MHC. And so we'll now continue to send the messages back and forth to him. Now, if this enable TX didn't turn off automatically, to be honest, you could go down the pub and do something interesting and just leave this to work the band for the rest of the evening. So there we go. So that's how a QSO progresses in FT8. So here's a few tips on operating FTA. Get yourself the WSJTX online guide, which is free. There's lots of really useful information in there to get you started and help you deal with problems. Also, Gary Hinson, I've forgotten his G call sign, but he's written a very good practical guide as well, which is very comprehensive and provides an alternative. What that one contains, as much as anything, is lots of useful information on how to get the best out of FTA. Don't forget, manually set your TX frequency. Find an empty space to do that. Gives you a much better chance of making a successful QSO. And you need to watch the audio levels, that you don't overload the audio stages of your rig. Now, when you get the signal reports, if you get a positive signal report from the station you're working, it means you really need to reduce your signal level. Most signal reports you get under normal conditions will be a negative result. Okay, if you're getting positive results, you really need to wind down the power a bit. So beyond FTA, so FTA, as I've said, is just a minimum contact system. It enables you to do the bare essentials of a contact. An alternative is JS8 call, which is basically FT8 code that's been adapted to move away from structured messages, which lets you put free text messages in there. It is very slow, but you can have QSOs. As I said before, by far the best data mode for free text QSOs is PSK31. Now, one of the things that FLDigi is used for in the States is there's a very good messaging system with FLDigi, which they use for their emergency services messaging system. It's very well developed. I don't think we use it over here. I'm not sure why, but it does work extremely well for them, and it's all built into FLDigi. Now, there's all sorts of new modes coming in FLDigi and also in WSJTX. So you can do some faster modes here with FLDigi and also on VHF and UHF. It's still only available in the alpha release of FLDigi. So if anyone wants to play with faster modes and different modes, that's there. So let's just summarize that, because I think I've been talking for a little while now. So the message here really is that data modes are cheap and easy to get going. It enhances your communication skills. There is always activity. So when the bands are dreadful and you can't talk to anyone, you've always got FT8 to go to. So this is a set of web links you might find useful that relate to all the stuff that I mentioned in this little chat. And I'll send the slide pack up to you if you want. I'll send you a PDF of this that you can circulate to people. And I think I've got a separate sheet with all these links on, if that's helpful. And I also sell data cards. So if you want to use a Raspberry Pi for your data modes instead of your computer, I've got a little card I've put together that makes it about as easy as you can get. And that's my lot. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much indeed for that, Mike. I'm sure everyone found that very fascinating and has learnt quite a bit this evening.
I hope it wasn't too basic. It's hard to know where to pitch these. This
is where we get to the questions and see how much that extends it. I've just got one question initially, Mike.
Yes.
2 days ago, I was attending the Milton Keynes online meeting, where Bob Heil of Microphone Headphones was talking, and he was absolutely transfixed, not surprisingly, on equalization of the audio circuit to optimize voice. Is there a clash here between data modes and equalization for voice, and does that get overcome by using the sound card?
It depends on how your rig handles it. Now, some rigs, the more modern rigs, when they do the data modes, it bypasses the speech processing, which is a good thing, because really for data modes, what you ideally want is a flat frequency response. Now, one of the things that WSJTX does to try and avoid all these problems is there's a little box called fake it in the settings that is normally left ticked. And what it does is it ensures your transmissions occur in the mid band of the audio range. So if you, for example, were to click on a transmit frequency, which would be a very low audio tone, what it will do in the background is actually shift your transmitter carrier frequency slightly to put that audio tone back in the middle of the passband. It's all done silently, you don't need to worry about it, but so it endeavors to keep the data mode's tones in the center of the passband, which is an area that gets less processing, if you like, than the top and bottom ends. So you're unlikely to hit awkward filter responses and the like.
Okay.
So it can be an issue. You don't really want to send data modes through a compressor or anything like that.
No. Okay. Anyone else want to chip in?
Jerry, but what has been explained to me is what all the little messages are that I was afraid to transmit on FT8.
Yeah.
They're already pre-done there.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, oh, what do I do? And I didn't really know. And I thought, I don't want to make an idiot out of myself by transmitting or worrying that I'd transmitted, but I could see that I hadn't. So it's just cleared up that kind of wonderment of what those messages actually are.
Yes, it generates them for you. Once you double click on the station you want to work, you'll find it gets populated with all those messages with the right calls, and then it steps through them automatically.
I was saying to Malcolm earlier on that I don't use WSJTX. I was using JTDX because that worked for me on the radio straight away. Yeah. Didn't have any issues. It just worked straight away. I thought, great, it's picked up the settings. But then somebody else said, oh, you're missing a little bit of information on the left-hand side of the screen that WSJTX has. Yeah. Which I didn't know, but I will look into it because I've downloaded a new version now, and I'll have a look at it over the next few weeks when I get time. So thank you for opening up that little window in my kind of sheltered knowledge.
Good. Oh, I'm glad it's been useful. Thank you.
Anyone else want to pitch in?
One of the things that I find is that people don't knock their ALC down when you talk about controlling your output. I've got a TS590SG, and I take the meter off of SWR and onto ALC and just turn the ALC down so it's a nice clean signal.
Yes.
And I think it's probably a lot of people don't do that now.
There are a lot of bad signals out there.
Yeah.
There's two causes of bad signal. One is where they overload the audio input to the rig, which creates an awful mess on the band. And the other is where they overdrive the transmitter as well. So it's all about moderation. When setting up your rig with a dummy load, you want to get it so that when you alter the level control on WSJTX, you can see your output power going up and down together. Because if you've got that, it means that you're out of any limiting, and it means you're not topping out the audio, etc. So it's a good way of making sure that you've got the chain under control, is if you alter that little slider up and down and the transmit power goes up and down, the chances are you're pretty much okay.
That's good.
The other thing that's dead easy to do these days, of course, is if you've got a dongle, I use a variety of these little SDR receivers that are about, is to monitor your own signal. which is dead easy to do these days. I run on my main antenna feed, I've got a 40 dB RF tap on it, and I use that to feed all sorts. So I look at a spectrum analyzer so I can see my signal going out, but I also send it to a rig so I can see what's going on. So it's just, it's so easy and cheap these days to monitor your own signal that it's well worth doing it as a real life test of what it's doing.
Would actually make a good subject for another talk.
Yeah, I could do that. Yeah, monitoring your transmitter. Yeah.
Okay, great. Any other questions then for Mike? I think we've got G4CKS.
You're pitching to the converted. I'm a huge fan of FT8, and
Yes.
I thought that was a fantastic summary and explanation. So fantastic talk. But you briefly made reference to PSK Reporter.
Yeah.
And also there's a thing called JT Alert. So for those not already doing that, the exciting thing about digital is you can get close to real-time visual confirmation of where your signal is reaching around the globe. Which is what I find really exciting. It's just fantastic to see that you're, bombing into Japan or China or wherever. So that's the beauty of digital for me, is this fantastic visual feedback that you get from PSK Reporter and things like JT Alert.
JT Alert, yeah, they're very good.
So anyway, thanks for the talk. Thank you very much.
That's okay. If you want to learn more about those extras on FT8, then Gary Hinson's help guide is really good because he covers a lot of that stuff.
I've just got one other question, Mike, if I might. There's, I think, been a bit of a debate about whether in FT8 the final, not the customary 73 that comes at the end. And from what I've found with some people, they expect now the 73. So it's like, I've confirmed the QSO. Yes, you've confirmed it. Now I want to confirm it with a 73, and so on and so on. It's like they won't stop. They won't go away until you've sent them the 73, which is particularly awkward in contests. Any views on that?
Yeah, I know. It's well, the correct sequence, as defined in the user guide and everything, is right through to that final 73. But people want to take shortcuts, don't they, to save time and all that. And so some people are dropping that final 73. I've noticed that. And I don't suppose there's anything you can do about it. Folks will do what folks are going to do, and you're always going to get these things.
Yeah, I mean, my logic is that if you go back to calling CQ, then obviously you've confirmed it and you're on to the next thing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, some people can be stubborn on things like that. And sometimes, of course, it's people who are inexperienced, who know this is how it's supposed to go. So they're waiting for that last bit, thinking until they've got that, they're not confirmed. But of course, it's actually been confirmed in the previous session. So
yes, yeah, where we ought to take a leaf out of the Moon Bouncers book and play that game where it is confirmed once you've got the Roger 73 and so on. Yeah, which of course where all this comes from, it comes from the hardcore weak signal people, or the EME people and the like, with their structured messages that they use in order to confirm CW QSOs and all that sort of thing. So yeah, that's the basis of it.
I would query why the Italians are sending 1 and 2 kilowatt signals for weak signal. What do they call strong signal?
I know. If you go on 20 meters in particular and look at the signals there, the strongest signals on the band will be the FT8s.
Yeah.
Which is sort of annoying because it doesn't need to be like that. They could all turn down sort of 10, 15 dB with no trouble at all and still get through.
Any other questions for Mike?
Very interesting. I'm new to all this.
Yeah.
I've played around with bits of software. I understand it a lot better now. Just for getting started and listening in, is there any way of routing a web SDR into the software? Presumably I could put a bit of 3.5 jack out of the speaker socket and back in the mic socket just for reception, or is there some Is there a web SDR that does decode, or is there some magic way I can link a web SDR to one of these bits of software?
Oh.
Now you're into virtual audio cables.
Right, they're a thing. Okay.
Yeah, there's a thing called a virtual audio cable, which is like a software. It's a bit of software that replaces that cable you speak about. So instead of sending the output of your web SDR to your speakers, you send it into this virtual cable, virtual audio cable, and the input to WSJTX comes off of that cable as well. So it routes electronically. Now, if you've not done it before, people do get their head in a bit of a spin trying to do this. I've explained it once or twice in my column, but maybe I ought to do it again. And maybe I ought to put it in this presentation.
I'm a long-term computer techie, so I'll probably be all right. Could you recommend a product?
VB, I think
something buried inside Windows.
Yeah, VB Audio, I think it's called, is the
VB, Victor Bravo.
Victor Bravo. Let me just check that. They do a free one. Yeah, that's the one. VB Audio do one.
Lovely. Thank you very much. I'll have a play.
The best one is Virtual Audio Cable by Eugene Mazhishenko, who's a Russian.
It sounds Russian, yeah.
Yeah. But that one's been about for donkey's years, and it's absolutely rock solid. If you Google VAC, Virtual Audio Cable, his is a paid for. I think there's a free trial. It's a paid for, but it's not a lot of money. And it's very powerful if you ever want to do stuff of moving audio in the digital domain around a computer between applications.
Oh, super. Thank you very much.
That's okay.
If not, well, Mike, many thanks indeed for joining us this evening.
Jolly good.
Thanks for everyone else joining us. We've had sort of about 28 people, I think, on the call this evening, which is great to see.
Yeah,
and
that's good.
you know, we're very pleased to be able to extend the invitation out to the other clubs as well. And Mike, I think, bearing in mind the quality of your presentation this evening, we'd be very happy to twist it on, come back again.
Yeah, that's fine.
Occasion for one of your other topics.
Yeah, well, I got 2 or 3 talks I can do for you.
Yes, great. Right,
No
well,
problem.
let's hope that the A31 roadworks are not too troublesome for you. And look forward to seeing you again before too long.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, many thanks,
All
Mike.
right, everyone.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay.
Thanks all.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mike.
And
No
I'll
problem.
close the Zoom session.